Satan wearing a holy disguise. It's the temporary quiet we feel when the noise stops for a moment, the brief relief after a problem fades, the artificial stillness our minds create just to keep us functioning. I lived my entire life resting in that imitation peace, convinced it was enough, until the night my heart stopped beating and every illusion I had ever held evaporated in an instant. My name is Daniel Harrow. I'm 43 years old, a high school history teacher, a husband, and a father of two. I wasn't running from God, and I wasn't living recklessly. If anything, I thought I had mastered balance, work, family, faith, routine. People often told me I seemed serene, the kind of man who never lets anything shake him. I believed them. I even believed myself. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when my life slipped out of my hands and I crossed a threshold I never expected to cross, because the peace I thought I understood died with me. What met me on the other side wasn't silence. It wasn't floating or dreaming or drifting through darkness. It was a presence so overwhelming, so alive, so impossibly complete that every emotion I had ever felt on earth seemed like a faint shadow of the real thing. Jesus didn't just show me peace. He showed me a dimension of existence shaped entirely by it, a peace that dissolves fear before fear even forms. And once you encounter that peace, nothing on earth feels the same again. Before the night my life ended, I believed everything about my routine made sense. My days unfolded with predictable structure, the kind people admire because it looks disciplined from the outside. I woke before sunrise, brewed my coffee in the same chipped mug, reviewed my lesson plans, and drove to school humming worship songs under my breath. My classroom was orderly, my students respected me, and my colleagues often commented on how calm I seemed, as if nothing ever unsettled me. I accepted their compliments like proof that whatever peace I had must be genuine. But what none of them saw, what I refused to see, was the quiet exhaustion always gnawing beneath the surface. At home, I played the role of steady husband and patient father, carrying the invisible weight of expectations I never dared question. I told myself it was strength. I told myself everyone felt this tired. My wife, Rachel, would ask if I was overwhelmed, and I would smile, shake my head, and say, "Just a long day." Inside, though, my mind never rested. I was always calculating, planning, worrying, about finances, about my children's future, about school deadlines, about whether I was keeping up the image of a man who had everything under control. Even in church, where I served faithfully, I treated stillness like a task. I bowed my head, closed my eyes, and waited for the moment I could stand again. I mistook routine for peace and discipline for surrender. I didn't know the difference then. Most people don't. We confuse the absence of chaos with the presence of peace, and we call our numbness strength, because the world praises us for holding ourselves together. But my body knew what my mind refused to acknowledge. The headaches that lingered behind my temples, the tightness in my chest whenever I climbed the stairs at school, the constant sense that I had to breathe a little deeper just to feel normal. Small warnings, subtle alarms I silenced with excuses. Stress, age, a busy season. I convinced myself it was nothing. I had no idea these whispers were the first cracks in the life I thought was stable, the quiet signals that everything I called peace was about to be shattered. The night everything stopped began like any other, which is what makes it so unsettling to remember. It was a Wednesday, 8:42 p.m., when the first real warning hit me. I had just finished grading papers at the kitchen table when a heavy pressure wrapped around my chest, not sharp, not sudden, just a tightening fist that refused to release. I tried to breathe deeply, convinced it would fade. It didn't. Instead, a slow wave of dizziness rolled through me, and for a moment the room tilted as if it were trying to slip away. Rachel noticed immediately. "Daniel, are you okay?" Her voice was sharper than usual, carrying the quiet fear she tried to hide. I forced a nod, told her it was probably stress. But when I stood, my legs trembled and the air felt thin, as though something essential had been removed from it. By 9:11 p.m., the pressure had grown into something fierce and unignorable. My left arm tingled, my vision blurred at the edges, and a cold sweat soaked through my shirt. Rachel called emergency services while I sat hunched on the couch, trying to keep my breathing steady. The paramedics arrived quickly, their calm efficiency both reassuring and terrifying. One placed electrodes on my chest, while the other asked questions I could barely answer. When they lifted me onto the stretcher, I saw Rachel's face, pale, tense, eyes shimmering with fear she didn't dare voice. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and clipped medical dialogue. My heart rhythm was abnormal. I heard them say it twice. I remember looking at the ceiling lights streaking above me, each one bending slightly as the world wavered in and out of clarity. At 9:29 p.m., the pain surged so violently it felt as if something inside me tore open. I gasped, reaching instinctively for the medic's arm, but my hand never made it. The next moments unfolded with brutal clarity. In the emergency room, alarms erupted. Nurses rushed. A doctor shouted orders. The room spun, contracted, then expanded again. I heard Rachel's voice somewhere beyond the curtain, trembling, trying to ask if I was still conscious. I wanted to answer. I couldn't. Then, at 9:37 p.m., everything collapsed. My heart stopped. The monitors screamed, their flatline a piercing accusation. Hands pressed hard into my chest. Someone called for epinephrine. Another demanded the crash cart. The world became frantic motion, bodies moving with desperate precision, the air thick with urgency. And then nothing. No sound, no weight, no pain. The room dissolved into a silence so absolute it felt like stepping outside existence itself. I was aware, fully aware, yet detached from the body lying beneath bright fluorescent lights. The chaos faded, replaced by a stillness that was not empty but impossibly full, as if the entire universe had paused to breathe. That was the moment I understood. Something had ended, and something else had just begun. The first thing I noticed after the world fell silent was the weightlessness, not the physical kind, but the lifting of something I didn't even know I had been carrying all my life. On Earth, peace always felt temporary, delicate, something you had to protect from interruptions and distractions. But here, as the noise of the hospital vanished, I felt a peace that didn't need defending. It was complete, whole, untouched by anything external. It wasn't the absence of fear, it was the impossibility of fear. As if the emotion simply did not exist in this place. I became aware of myself without feeling confined to a body. There was no tightness in my chest, no struggle for breath, no tremor of anxiety hiding behind each heartbeat. Just a gentle awareness, steady and calm, resting in something far larger than me. The environment around me wasn't a landscape, but a presence, an atmosphere that felt alive. It was light, not bright or blinding, just a warm, quiet radiance that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And within that light, a stillness that held more truth than any sound I had ever heard. The peace didn't surround me. It filled me, moved through me, as if it were rewriting every fragmented piece of my inner life. I had never known that peace could feel active, intentional, almost intelligent. It was as though this presence understood every fear I had ever carried and dissolved them without effort, like shadows disappearing when the sun rises. Nothing was demanded of me, nothing was expected. The peace itself was enough. And then I sensed him, not through sight. There was no figure approaching, no footsteps, no shift in the light. It was his presence that reached me first, unmistakable, immeasurable, overwhelming in the gentlest way imaginable. The peace I felt wasn't just an atmosphere, it was a person. It was him. The realization didn't come through reasoning or recognition, but through immediate knowing, the way the soul knows its source without needing proof. As his presence drew nearer, the peace deepened, expanding into something too vast for words. Every part of me responded, not with fear, but with a reverence so profound it felt like breathing for the first time. He hadn't spoken yet, but his nearness carried meaning, comfort, wisdom. It was like standing in the center of a truth I had chased my entire life without knowing it. And in that moment, without seeing his face, I understood. This was the peace Jesus had always offered, the peace I had quoted, prayed for, and tried to imitate, but had never truly encountered. A peace that wasn't an emotion but a reality, alive and absolute, reaching me in a way nothing earthly ever could. When Jesus finally spoke, his voice didn't echo or vibrate like sound does on earth. It moved through me, settling into places I didn't know needed healing. It carried strength without force, clarity without harshness, and a tenderness that disarmed every defense I had ever built. "You have searched for peace," he said, "but you searched for it in places that cannot hold it." The moment he spoke those words, the light around us shifted, not brighter, but deeper, as if revealing layers of truth I had never noticed before. I felt him guiding me gently into memories, not with accusation, but with a kind of loving precision that pierced through all my self-made narratives. The first scene unfolded effortlessly. I was sitting in my classroom years earlier, after the students had left. I remembered feeling proud of myself for staying calm during a tough day, believing I had demonstrated peace under pressure. But Jesus showed me what was happening beneath that calm exterior: my clenched jaw, my shallow breathing, my fear of disappointing others. "You called this peace," he said, "but it was only suppression." The scene dissolved, and another took its place. I saw myself on a quiet Sunday morning, walking into church with my family. I remembered thinking how steady and spiritually anchored I felt. But Jesus let me see what I had ignored: the constant comparing of myself to others, the worry about how I was perceived, the subtle tightening in my chest whenever someone asked how I was really doing. "You sought peace in approval," he said, "but approval cannot rest the soul." A third moment surfaced, one I hadn't thought of in years. I was sitting beside Rachel on the couch after a disagreement, both of us pretending things were resolved. I had told myself tranquility had returned, but Jesus revealed the truth: how I avoided vulnerability, how I hid behind silence, how I chose comfort over connection. "You sought peace in control," he whispered, "but control is the enemy of peace, not its source." Each memory washed over me with a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. There was no condemnation in his presence, only revelation. Jesus wasn't showing me these moments to shame me, he was showing them to free me. "You lived much of your life managing your fears," he said, "and you mistook the absence of conflict for peace. But peace is not the absence of struggle. It is the presence of my authority." The word authority didn't feel domineering. It felt like a foundation, solid, immovable, trustworthy. Jesus continued, "My peace does not depend on circumstances. It does not need quiet or success or control. My peace flows from who I am. When you try to create peace on your own, you build it from sand. But when you receive my peace, you stand on rock." I felt something shift inside me, as though a truth I had always known intellectually had finally become real in the deepest part of my being. His presence was the peace, not an emotion, not a moment, not a fragile calm, but a person. And standing before him, I understood. The peace I had chased my whole life had never been something to achieve. It had always been someone to surrender to. When the final memory faded, Jesus turned his attention fully toward me, and the peace surrounding us deepened in a way that made everything within me go still. There was no fear, no question, no resistance, just a quiet readiness I didn't know I was capable of. He spoke again, and his words carried a weight that felt eternal. "You understand now," he said, "why so many never touch the peace I offer. They know my teachings, they speak my name, they follow my routines, but they do not surrender their hearts. They try to manufacture peace on their own, and they call it faith." I felt the truth of that more sharply than any revelation before it. Images came to me, faces of people I loved, people I admired, people who believed they were fine because they lived good, structured lives. I sensed the ache in Jesus' voice when he continued, "Millions live like this, Daniel, even those who love me deeply. They settle for the illusion of peace because they fear what surrender will cost. But true peace is not the reward at the end of control. It is the beginning of letting go." I didn't respond. I simply listened, willing myself to take in every word. And then he said something that shook me more than the moment my heart had stopped. "You must return." The peace around me remained, but a sharp ache ran through me at the thought of leaving it. "Why?" I asked, not in refusal but in longing. Jesus stepped closer, and his presence wrapped around me like the warmest certainty I had ever known. "Because they need to hear what you have seen. They need to know that peace is not something they must achieve. It is something they must receive. I am sending you back to tell them." Before I could speak again, the light began to thin, like a veil being drawn away. The peace remained for a breath, then slipped from my grasp as gravity, weight, and sound rushed in all at once. Chaos slammed into me. The violent pressure of CPR, the sting of air forced into my lungs, the sharp voices shouting commands. My body felt heavy, foreign, painfully small after the expansiveness of his presence. I opened my eyes to blinding hospital lights, doctors frozen in disbelief, and Rachel sobbing into her hands. The contrast was unbearable, peace beyond understanding replaced by the harshness of earthly life. But even through the pain, I knew why I had come back. The world needed the message he had entrusted to me. If you've listened this far, I want to tell you something plainly. The peace Jesus showed me isn't reserved for the dying. It isn't a secret reserved for the spiritually elite or a prize handed out to people who manage to hold their lives together. That was one of the biggest lies I lived under. The belief that peace was something I had to earn through discipline, control, or perfection. But Jesus made it unmistakably clear. Peace begins where surrender begins. And surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means finally admitting you were never meant to carry everything alone. Maybe you've been calling exhaustion normal. Maybe you've convinced yourself your numbness is maturity. Maybe you've mistaken busyness for purpose, performance for faith, or silence for healing. I did all of that. I buried my fears under responsibilities and told myself it was strength. But Jesus didn't ask me to manage my life. He asked me to release it. Peace wasn't waiting on the other side of my effort. It was waiting on the other side of my surrender. So I want to invite you into something simple, something that changed everything for me. Wherever you are, just pause, breathe slowly. Let the noise in your mind settle for a moment, and then name the weight you're carrying, the fear, the pressure, the resentment, the expectation you've been forcing yourself to meet. Speak it honestly, even if your voice trembles. Peace doesn't come through pretending. It comes through truth. Now release it. Not into the air, not into some vague hope, but directly to him. Say even quietly, Jesus, I surrender this to you. I can't create peace. I need yours. It may feel small, but that single moment of honesty creates the opening where his presence enters. The peace he showed me, the peace that filled every part of me beyond the limits of this world, begins right there. You don't have to die to experience it. You don't have to reach the end of yourself. You only have to let go of the illusion that you can carry your life alone. The peace I encountered is real. It's alive. And it's reaching for you now the same way it reached for me. If this message touched you, don't let it end here. Take a moment right now to share this video with someone you know who's carrying a weight they were never meant to hold. You might become the reason they finally discover the peace Jesus has been offering them their whole life. And if you want more stories, teachings, and testimonies that draw you closer to him, make sure you subscribe. We're walking this journey together.